we have a very special podcast today. We have a very special guest. He's one of the OGs in the crypto space. He's gone through multiple crypto winners. He's the co-founder and CEO of Pocket Network. My guest is none other than Michael O'Rourke. Michael, thanks so much for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. Thanks for having me here.
Awesome. So, Michael, just to give some people some background on yourself and what you do at Pocket, could you just give us a little bit of background, like what's your mission? Why did you start Pocket?
Yeah, we started working on Pocket late 2016. Me and my other co-founders were four people who have been here since the beginning. And back then, it was right after the DAO hack on Ethereum, and we started writing smart contracts and started using some various infrastructure services, and really saw an opportunity there to design something that would work for Ethereum, not just for Ethereum, but for many other blockchains, right? Even back then, a core thesis of ours, this really has driven a lot of Pocket, is that we think we are going to live in a world where there's hundreds or thousands of chains governing our lives in some respect. And really that first interaction of using these third-party providers and seeing the importance of them for Ethereum was really instructive for us and has kind of guided us since we really started thinking about it.
And so did you get in as an investor? I mean, what really got you attracted to space? I mean, I got in initially as an investor to make money. Then I thought the underlying technology was really interesting. This could open up like the web, right? Like there's so many different use cases for this technology. Then I got really interested in those types of things. That's when we kind of got connected as well. So what attracted you into the space? And you've been here for quite some time now. You've seen a lot more than others have, being in this for multiple years. What attracted you and what keeps you attracted to this space?
Yeah, good question. So I got in 2013. I had read a couple articles, the major one being the Wired expose, actually on the Silk Road, and that kind of introduced me to Bitcoin, and ended up on the Bitcoin subreddit, ended up reading the white paper. And I think what really kind of made me open to Bitcoin back then was, one, I'm from the Caribbean, I live in the US, so being able to send money without dealing with Western Union and these other things was actually quite a powerful idea for me. And I mean, being native, like an internet native, right? The idea of digital currency was not something that I was necessarily intimidated by. And I think as a result of that, kind of just made me generally open to what Bitcoin was or is, right? And at that point, I just bought it, using Coinbase, and have kept, just participating in the system, right? Back then, I wasn't a developer, so outside of participating in the community in Bitcoin, I didn't really do much. What really changed things for me was Ethereum, when I was really able to. By then, I was already building iOS apps, and I was able to write smart contracts, and that opened my eyes to the potential of Ethereum and just generally the space as a whole. But I've just always been part of it in that respect. I just really started building in late 2016.
And I think one of the key advantages, or the major advantages, right, is decentralization, censorship resistance. A big part of the value proposition of Pocket Network is this decentralization. So why do you think decentralization is so important? And walk us through what that really means.
Yeah. So that's a great question. Decentralization is important in a couple respects. One, we live in a world where really very few people control lots of things in this world, and we've got these systems in place that are very tough to break. And they're not as equitable for just people generally participating in them. Right. That's where really decentralization is truly important. Whether it's Bitcoin with monetary system, and people are trying to break SoundCloud or music on the blockchain, all sorts of stuff, right? Really where there's few power structures with few people making really impactful decisions. Right. I think that's where decentralization is really important. And another piece, actually, and this goes into a little bit into Pocket, is in some cases decentralization can be more efficient than existing structures, right? And I think there's a real case for that as well in some cases. But generally speaking, if we lived in a world where it was easy to move money and access to banks and things like that, Bitcoin wouldn't be as successful as it is, right? But we do. So and that's really, I think, a big catalyst for it.
Right. And this decentralization movement has really, sparked, and there's been ups and downs, but overall, I think there's a lot of promise to this space, and we're certainly moving in that direction. When I entered the space, I thought that there would be a multi-chain world because I saw all of these different things. I couldn't tell the difference originally. And then I became somewhat of a maximalist of like Bitcoin and Ethereum. And then now, as I have more experience, I see this world similar to you of like, this is going to be a multi-chain world. And there's going to be a variety of different blockchains with different strengths and weaknesses for different use cases. Why do you believe there will be a multi-chain world versus like one or two chains winning out?
Yeah, I think it's a matter of efficiency. So many of these chains, ourselves included, started building on these smart contract platforms, these generalized smart contract platforms, and you can think of it as almost like a race where can they scale and reach penetration quick enough before people with brilliant ideas for protocols can build them. And so far, they're capturing some of the value, right? We're seeing it in DeFi and things like that. But in most cases where I'm building a specific protocol to solve supply chain, or in Pocket's case, infrastructure, or in Aragon's case, governance, or you've got, for example, Handshake doing DNS, right? You've got all these kind of like application-specific blockchains that, by building out their own blockchain, they're actually able to make the mechanisms and structure of it much more efficient. Because if you're building on smart contract platform, outside of just like TPS, transaction speeds and things like that, there's a whole bunch of other bloat that you have to deal with as a protocol builder when you have a generalized platform, right? And in some cases where you've got infrequent but high value transactions, these smart contracting platforms, at least Ethereum, is perfect for it, right? But as you get into more granular kinds of things where you want to really tweak your incentives, or in terms of finding consensus amongst transaction and things like that, the bigger generalized blockchain gets, well, the more nodes have to reach consensus, which it's costs, what we call cost of consensus, right? And in some cases, it impacts decentralized technologies in such a way where it's not even feasible or worth doing, right? Unless you can find solutions that are closer to the metal, right? So, for example, creating what would be a smart contract in Ethereum, making that like a real, what we call RPC call in an actual blockchain, right? So these sorts of things end up being much more efficient. So we're seeing dozens, if not hundreds, of protocols being launched today on Tendermint and Polkadot that are quite literally in this race right now, where they're like, what, we tried building on Ethereum. It makes way more sense for us to build a blockchain that's solving this one problem really well, right? So that's why I think we're starting to see that in a significant way.
And you just published actually a new version of the Pocket white paper. So are there some key, and I'm going to have a link to that after this in the description, but can you give us some highlights, like what's new about this release? You guys have been working on this for quite some time now, and I think it's really coming together quite nicely, especially with the usage now with the Pocket Core MVP. But could you talk through some of the highlights of the newly released white paper?
Yeah, so we've worked on Pocket in a very iterative way, right? Where we finalized the first version of our white paper in November of last year, so 2018. And once we finalized that spec, we started building the thing. And through building it, we had lots of learnings and iterations. And as a result, the really big differences with what we had done in November and what we launched or released in terms of the spec last week was it's really much simpler. Is a big thing, right? So previously we had the concept of validator nodes and karma and service nodes and developers. Now it's a really simple architecture. We have developers, you have service nodes, and you have the blockchain, and that's it.
That's simple.
So it's quite simple, actually. So that's really the biggest, and it's something that had already been in place for quite some time. But I'm sure as the space things move fast, and we hadn't really gotten to updating the kind of source of truth in that respect. So we're super happy to have released that, and yeah, that's going to be what we launch with, that spec. So and we're actually really proud that it's only about 9 or 10 pages, the actual spec. So
I was going to say the same thing, because what's the Bitcoin white paper is like, I don't know, 8 to 12 pages.
Yeah, it's about 10 pages. Yeah.
10
So
pages. Yeah.
yeah, so to be able to succinctly describe the protocol in that space with lots of code blocks and things like that, that kind of are space fillers. We're super proud of that, actually, and there's real beauty and simplicity in that respect.
Yeah, that means you've kind of like thought things through. So with that being said, like as you look, I'm sure as you went through the white paper process, you had to plan out the next, however many years. How do you see Pocket maturing and developing in the industry over the next, I don't know, 2 to 5 years out? If you look at it, what do you want to be for the industry?
Yeah, good question. So, I mean, based on what we're seeing today, where we're seeing applications in production use Pocket when we're not even live yet, we really see Pocket as becoming the core infrastructure layer for every blockchain. So, very much how websites like Squarespace, Wix, and these other kind of website creation platforms, WordPress, made it really easy for me to spin up a website. For that to happen, there was a whole host of infrastructure behind that, right? From the server side to just so many different things that had to be invented before I could even create my own website like that easily, right?
Yeah.
We are part of, and these important pieces are like AWS, for example, is super important, right? We see ourselves as a core piece to enable future entrepreneurs and inventors to build out these visions of incredible blockchains, right, or incredible protocols. And we see ourselves as being the core piece of support for all of them, right? Almost like how HTTP is a core piece of our lives every day. Via VoIP, right? We're actually on VoIP right now, speaking through Zoom, right? These are core protocols that are used in everyday businesses. We see ourselves as kind of just a core piece of that layer where it's like, yeah, okay, we'll use Pocket, we'll use XYZ, we'll use this other thing, right? And just really, just help making it easier for future entrepreneurs to take the building blocks of what people are building today. And we plan on being a core piece of those building blocks, one of those building blocks.
And speaking of future entrepreneurs, and given your experience, your background, the amount of time you've been in the space, if you were an entrepreneur, or if you could give advice to the new high schooler or college student, I don't know, anybody that's like getting out of their industry and joining the space, is there advice that you can share with anybody that is entering the space? I know there's a ton of education drinking from the fire hose your first, like, I don't know, even couple years. But any advice you have for new entrepreneurs entering the space?
Yeah, specifically the crypto space.
Yeah.
I would say try to stay out of the bubbles, of the thought bubbles, and try your hardest to think independently. I think actually a potential downside of crypto is that because everything is open source, there's actually less independent thought in some respects. Whereas, in the 90s and startups, before, open source was the thing, it was do or die, figure it out yourself. And that actually caused a lot of innovation. A problem I'm seeing is that we're seeing a lot of, it's a double-edged sword, right? In that respect. Try your hardest to think from first principles. Don't pay attention to, read everything you can, but don't pay attention to trends. Just do what makes sense for your protocol and what makes sense for your case. Because there's a lot of thinking out there that may not make sense for you, right? And if you lean on that too much, you run the risk of not having the best protocol or product that you can potentially build. So I just think specifically to the crypto space, like open source is a double-edged sword. It's great. Anyone can build on it. Anyone can take from, we're built on Pocket is built on the shoulders of giants, right?
Right.
Just keep in mind, don't get sucked into the bubbles. Don't get locked into one model or one mode of thinking, just because, it's something you hear a lot, or even if it's well reasoned, right? Just try to think from first principles in that respect.
Those are really wise words. If you stick to that, I feel like you're going to be in the right headspace moving forward. So with that being said, do you have some like favorite blockchain projects? Not necessarily ones you partner with. If you do partner with them, that's great. But is there like interesting stuff? want to educate people, and you have such a great background on like what is interesting out there that they may not be aware of that you, because you're an insider, you know of. Do you have like a set of favorite blockchain projects you've been following?
Yeah. So I'm partial to protocols that are really good at solving the problem that they're
Hmm.
solving. To list off a few that I find super, super interesting. I already mentioned Handshake, which is solving decentralized DNS. Althea is super, super interesting to me.
Hmm.
Althea is a mesh network. So people run nodes and you act as a entrance point for the internet of people participating in the Althea for the
Oh,
internet,
wow.
right? But in their intranet, right?
Hmm.
Um, which I find projects like these super, super interesting. There's a project I came across the other day. It's called Centrifuge. Really well reasoned project. They take this idea of invoices where I don't get paid for 90 days,
Hmm.
and they're adding liquidity to that, right?
Wow.
Through their chain, right? So effectively allowing me to get paid quicker and without so much of a percentage cut for these providers, right?
Hmm.
These kinds of projects for me are super interesting because they're not trying to boil the ocean,
Right.
and they're and they're really focused on like a traditional startup. They're really focused on getting the right users using their products,
Hmm.
which has been something missing from the last 2 years, in my opinion. So.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, seeing that and talking to entrepreneurs like that for me is super, super exciting.
Cool. And we had a chance to connect when I was last time when I was in Tampa, and the scene in Tampa is it's booming. And you moved into a new space, I believe it's called Embark Collective,
Yeah.
and you were highlighted by them too. Tampa has more co-working accelerator spaces in different areas than I've ever seen, and there's a lot of money coming into the city. So why do you think, what is the special sauce like the Tampa Bay scene? I know you guys were early in terms of crypto and blockchain adoption. What makes it so special? You guys are pretty close knit. Is there like a special secret sauce to Tampa Bay?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. For anyone that knows me, they definitely know I chill Tampa pretty hard. I'm super proud of being from here. I was raised here. I was, like I said, I was born in the Caribbean, but raised here. Tampa is really interesting because it's in a diverse, it's an incredibly diverse city. It's a hub, meaning you have people from all over the world living here
Mm-hmm.
in Tampa. Combined with being in the South, I think is actually quite interesting. That adds to the mix, and because Tampa specifically is not a traditional tech hub, everyone who is around and who's interested in tech, and even smaller so blockchain, tends to congregate around the same meetups or events and things like that. As a result, the bonds and just it's incredibly strong. The community here, particularly the blockchain community. I'm super super happy to be a part of it. It's really cool, and to be able to be kind of at the ground floor of a growing city where Tampa Bay, I think, is one of the top five, like in terms of incoming people, people moving to Tampa is in the nation or something like that. To be a part of this growth at the ground floor is just incredibly exciting.
Right.
And yeah, and the way I like to describe it is it's very spread out, not as large as LA, but just generally spread out like LA is,
Mm.
which I'm sure you're very aware of.
Right.
But with lots of pockets of just passionate people of things that they love, right? So
Mm.
like the food scene here, if you like to dance, if you're into sports, if you're into beer, wine, um, just everything. There's just you can find a pocket for everything, and because it's spread out, the few people that believe in this thing or whatever it is, they tend to congregate around the same places, and has been a just like a community, just people building these tiny communities of really passionate interests, right?
Right.
Um, and because of the size of the city, Tampa Bay, as in general, it's 2 million people, so there's not quite that saturation yet,
Mm.
and you really still get that community feel. A lot of us are thinking about how the scale is not to repeat the mistakes of other cities that have grown. So
Right.
that's something was something top of mind for lots of people in Tampa, actually.
Right. Yeah, and you articulated that really nicely. I felt the same thing. It feels like a family environment. There may not be a lot of people into crypto or blockchain, but all the people that are, and that's growing, all meet up at the same place. They get to know each other. And I was like, I got to meet a bunch of founders when I was out there in Tampa, and I was like, do you know Michael? They're like, yeah, of course we know Michael. Michael's awesome. You know, what Pocket's doing is awesome. And they all know each other. And I was like, well, do you know this founder? And everybody knows each other. And I think it's just a matter of time before the city grows. You all grow together. And I think it's going to be a very thriving city, you know, over the next, 3, 5, 10 years. So, I'm excited to come out there, I think, for the Synapse Summit.
Yeah.
That's going to be coming early next year. So to kind of close this out, Michael, are there any like updates, events, new things going on with Pocket that you want the audience to be aware of?
Yeah, our number one priority is getting the testnet. Our primary testnet. We're super excited about that. It's slated for February,
Okay.
late January, early February. So just a few months out. That's our number one thing right now.
Are you looking for people to jump on board the testnet? Are you looking for
we are.
Okay.
Yeah, so we definitely are. Take a look at our website. Developers, and so it's a two-sided marketplace, right? You have developers who need to access data, and you have people who want to run nodes. One of our major goals is to make it as easy as possible for anyone to run nodes. So you don't have to be a technical, wizard to actually run a full node. One of our major goals, and in terms of decentralization and just cost of running the network, is so that anyone can run a node. And we're really excited to be moving that direction. So I wouldn't be too intimidated, and also we're just super helpful, and we'll be more than happy to walk you through issues. So I definitely say if you're interested in building on Pocket, check out the website and their documentation. It's quite we have lots of it. So which we're proud of. So
Michael, thank you so much. Make sure, if you would like to jump on the Pocket testnet, follow Michael O'Rourke on Twitter, LinkedIn, all the different platforms, and Pocket Network. Thank you so much for joining. Michael, thank you so much for jumping on the podcast.
Shahan, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to speak with you.
Okay. All right. Thanks.